Hello, I'm Zoe Sadakerski. I'm a senior lecturer in visual communication at UTS. I have both a commercial design practice, primarily in book design, and a research practice. In this seminar, I'm talking about thinking through drawing, or journaling as method, for both design practice and design research. This lecture will meander a bit. I'm going to point you to resources you can follow up in your own time in order to develop a drawing and journaling practice. This will be a crucial part of developing your own design practice, whichever field you're studying in. First, I want to spend a moment on the term practice. Design is a practice, research is a practice. You have to keep practicing your craft. Upon finishing your degree, you don't magically become a designer. You have to self-direct your learning for your whole career. It is an ongoing practice. Even when you're a professional designer, you have to keep at it. You have to keep exploring, experimenting, taking risks, and making mistakes, or you will grow stagnant. You will fall behind your industry. Our world is moving terrifyingly quickly. You need to monitor how it's changing and how you fit within it, how your practice fits within it. This is part of your professional practice, and journaling will help you achieve this. Some of you may be thinking, but what if I can't draw? But this isn't about being a good draftsperson. Leonardo da Vinci was an extraordinary draftsman. He could draw in very great detail. However, he also knew how to make a quick sketch to get an idea out onto paper so he could develop it further. I'm using the term drawing, but we could also call it sketching or visual notation. What I mean is the act of getting ideas or observations out of your head and onto a page or screen. Here are some designers talking about how they capture ideas in their process, getting things from head through hand onto a surface. These 4 examples, 2 coming, are taken from a book called Inspired: How Creative People Think, Work and Find Inspiration by Dorte Nielsen and Kiki Hartman. On the left, Swedish product designer Ingrid Raman says, I sketch on greaseproof paper that I buy cheap from the supermarket. It's not intimidating. You can make mistakes without feeling that you've ruined the paper. The activity that I'm talking about in this seminar today is not making an incredibly beautifully illustrated and produced moleskin journal that you can then put photos up online. It's not about making precious objects or beautiful sketchbooks. It's about quickly getting ideas out on paper. Grab a wad of spare paper, use a bulldog clip, and you have a great notebook. Think about how you can work in a way that doesn't feel precious, that doesn't make you feel anxious about putting a mark on a blank page. On the right, London-based signage designer Fernando Gutierrez says ideas happen anywhere. On this scrap of paper, he's made a detailed sketch of a colorway and how something may happen before he gets to the computer. And I think this is important. Computers are amazing tools, but they're just that. They're a tool. They can't do your thinking for you. Whenever I sit down at the computer without having a plan for exactly what it is I want to use that tool, the computer, for, I spend hours pushing things around on a screen. You have to have an idea before you can use a computer. You don't have to have an idea before you start sketching or drawing or making, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Andy Altman of Why Not Associates said, I couldn't draw very well, so I had to stick stuff down. So rather than drawing or sketching, he actually chooses to collect whole bunches of ephemera, things that he finds inspirational for one reason or another, and he edits them down and collages them onto the pages of his notebook. These pages would be meaningful to him, not so much for the rest of us, but that's not the point here. Likewise, Danish fashion designer Marlene Anja Kaja says she creates Ideas Bank. These ideas banks are collections of fabric swatches and textures and colours and patterns. She's put them on a circular ring so she can move them around and make different combinations of things. In this lecture, I'm going to talk through 3 different approaches, 3 different kinds of thinking through drawing, using examples from art, design, and my own work. So the first approach is drawing as active observation. This is where we draw or sketch or collage or journal in order to make connections between ideas or shapes or patterns, between different projects, different conversations. It's a way that we find inspiration from within us and also start to play through our visual exploration. Milton Glaser's book, Drawing is Thinking, says the great benefit of drawing is that when you look at something, you see it for the first time, and you can spend your life without ever seeing anything. Glaser is the godfather of graphic design. He created some of the most well-known logos and images of his generation, and ours. As students, you should seek out designers and creative practitioners whose work you admire. Research how they work. What's their process? Look for monographs, books about their work, or interviews with them where they discuss process and inspiration. Research your heroes, look and learn from their work. Gehry Smith's book, How to Be an Explorer of the World, is an excellent resource with tips and activities to develop your observation skills. Smith says, when we constantly fill up all our empty time with stimulation in the form of electronic devices, games, and distractions, our brains become disengaged and the thinking process is effectively halted. We never get to hear our own inner voice. We don't develop a relationship with ourselves and our minds. We don't get to know who we are because we're not listening. Graphically, you might look at Gehry Smith's book and think it looks like something that's designed for children, but it actually has really fantastic exercises, and part of her point is don't be too precious. Allow your thinking and process to be messy. Everything doesn't have to look like a final piece of art, and in fact, if you don't let go, if you don't allow yourself to be messy and rough and let go of your perfectionism, you'll constantly be stuck at your first idea and very rarely move through to the more sophisticated ideas behind it. Linda Barry's a comic artist, and she talks about keeping a notebook in a serious way as being something that happened when she first started studying. She went to college in her 20s. And she says that she uses a journal or a notebook as both a navigation and expedition device, one that could reliably carry me into my past, deeper into my present, or further into a place I have come to call the image world, a place we all know even if we don't notice this knowing until someone reminds us of its ever-present existence. So Barry's book is really great, and she's got a few other resources that you can use. Look her up online. She's very generous with sharing the work that she does with her students and encouraging other people to access their own inner world or image world. Maria Popova runs a website called Brain Pickings, which is just lots of great little bits of information. She synthesizes some really interesting texts and ideas and has a lot of artists and designers present in the posts that she puts up. This one on drawing, she says, drawing is a vital way of thinking out loud, of giving form to ideas, of making arguments and fleshing out theories around the skeleton of observations. So we start by observing things in the world, and then we use sketching, visual notation, drawing as a way to flesh those ideas out. She says to draw today is to reclaim the dignity and private joy of seeing amid a culture obsessed with looking in public. And I think that this is an important thing to hold on to, the difference between looking and seeing. The act of looking is passive. Seeing implies you're doing some level of interpretation, of analysis. In some way, you are trying to actually take what you've seen and turn it internally into knowledge, or through sketching and journaling, into something that may be shareable. So here we come back to Kerry Smith's idea of owning an experience, an observation, of capturing something more than what can be seen through a camera. So here's an incredible meal that I ate in Japan in around 2012. I took quick snaps of each course on my iPhone, which is socially a very annoying thing to do. But I was so surprised and delighted by each of these little courses as they came out. In particular, up in the top right, there was a log that had mushrooms still growing on it. And I had to pick the mushrooms off and put them onto the grill to cook them myself. Later, I drew each of the dishes into this one thing so I could see the meal as a whole. Drawing each dish was almost as good as eating it again. I wanted to remember this meal as a whole experience, not a series of pictures that I flick through on a phone. Here are more drawings from Japan, this time an onsen, a Japanese bath. Obviously, because everyone's naked, you're not allowed to take photos in that space. So I'm drawing here from memory, about some of the weirdness of this social experience for me. Because most of us walk around with a camera in our hand, in our phones, we can be lazy and think that snapping photos will document our observations. But how often do you really scroll through your photo library to recall the context in which you snapped these photos? I annotate my drawings with notes to remind me why, at the time, the moment or feeling felt worth documenting. So the annotations on my sketches and drawings are actually as important as the drawings themselves. And that's what I don't have in a photo library. That's what I don't have when I'm trying to document things quickly on the fly. Again, from my same sketchbook from this trip to Japan, here's me documenting the snow monkeys at Jigokadani, a nature park near Nagano. And these snow monkeys hang out in the hot springs. I'm quite obsessed with them. I took photographs too when I visited the monkeys. And I ended up actually having an exhibition of work about these snow monkeys. And here's some of the photographs that were included in the catalogue. But I don't think of these as artworks in themselves. These are reference images that I used to draw from later, but primarily I drew from my own sketches. The exhibition itself was a series of works on paper, collages, and ink drawings. I can't remember clearly now, but I didn't necessarily intend to make an exhibition of work while I was in Japan looking at the monkeys. But my sketchbooks, when I went back to them later, I looked at the sketches that I'd made and knew that there was something there. I felt that there was something worth developing further and sharing. So just as the fashion designer talked about creating idea banks of swatches, my sketchbooks are a kind of idea bank for me to go back and rob later on. I'm not sure when these things are going to become relevant or significant for me, but sometimes I go back and there's something in there, a kernel of something, a glimmer of an idea that I want to hold on to. So the next section is on drawing to process ideas. This is a way that we actually think differently. My example of the sketchbook from Japan is quite a different process than what I use when I'm working on a commercial design project. My sketching in my journal from Japan is similar to what Linda Barry talks about, and that's when designers actually find that designing is not so much a job, but as a way of being in the world. And I keep sketchbooks with me all the time. And I sketch notes. Sometimes they become useful for a commercial project later, but sometimes they don't. Sketching as part of my professional practice is a different thing. This is where I draw in order to process ideas, in order to think through my hand, to have an iterative process in play where I'm having a conversation with myself on paper. You may want to look at Donald Shern's book, The Reflective Practitioner, where he talks about how designers have kind of feedback. They have conversations with their material through the process of making. Here's an example from Pixar where they've started to develop a series of characters. And I just want to point out here, this is quite different, this series of drawings, than storyboarding would be. And I don't have an example of a Pixar storyboard, but I'm sure you could find one if you hunted on the internet. But what's interesting, I think, with this is that what we're looking at is people playing between having a kind of drawing practice that's quite refined, but also these kind of sketchy things that we never really get to see when we look at a final film or when we look at a final work. What is the sketching and drawing like beforehand? And one of the designers from Pixar says, sketching out a storyboard is a way to write a story using pictures instead of words. The goal is to find actions presented visually that provide clues to what the character is thinking, feeling, or wants. So there are these different types of drawing in play in their professional practice, where even though it's not trying to sketch just a final design, sketching is still used as a way to think through or play through ideas and possibilities. Here's a different kind of sketching, which is Frank Gehry, and his initial treehouse sketch here looks very much like the final artifact over there. I draw without taking my pen off the page, he says. I don't think they mean anything to anyone except me. And then at the end of the day, the end of the project, they wheel out these little drawings and they're damn close to what the finished building is. And it's the drawing. So he does these drawings and there are things in his quick early sketches that he sees but he doesn't see. They inform his design process on a level beyond verbal language. Giorgia Lupi is a fantastic information designer, and she says drawing is a primary form of understanding reality and expressing thoughts and ideas. Drawing in any practice helps to freely navigate possibilities and to visually think without limitations and boundaries. It allows connections to be made. It opens mental spaces. And drawing also helps you to discover something you probably don't have in mind. Pablo Picasso, who again is another example of someone like Da Vinci that you might think of, the opposite of Da Vinci, where you might think of Da Vinci as being an extraordinary draftsman and Picasso as being someone who doesn't know where to put the nose and the mouth on a face. But Picasso was actually an extraordinary draftsman himself, and he actually played a lot with the way different types of sketches and drawings opened up different ways of seeing and thinking. He says, I draw like other people bite their nails. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. And to know what you're going to draw, you have to begin drawing. And this is a really important point. It's similar to what Lupi is saying, that actually it's not sitting around and waiting for inspiration or the idea to come to you, that you actually have to start doing something for that inspiration to come. Staring at a blank page is crippling. The second you start making marks on it, start sketching things out, you have decisions to make. Keep going, erase, do more, do less. Once you have decisions to make, then you can begin an iterative process of thinking through making. We call this a reflective practice, an iterative process. I do just want to have a small aside here, and this is that I've had this Picasso slide in for a few years, but in the Me Too era, should I be quoting Picasso? He did and said awful things to women. If you haven't already, watch Hannah Gadsby's show Nanette on Netflix. Gadsby, who I admire very much, suggests we should remove Picasso and his ilk from public discourse and find female artists with equally pithy quotable quotes, with equally interesting work from the time. I'm not sure it's so cut and dry, but I did spend 45 minutes looking for a suitable quote about drawing from one of Picasso's female contemporaries, without luck. So instead of removing this slide, I leave it here as a talking point for you. And bring you back to Giorgia Lupi, who says, drawing becomes design when you start tracing lines, symbols, and structures that help rationalize thoughts and envision a possible solution to a design problem. Drawing becomes design when it's used as a tool in the process of visual planning and organizing the choices made during the development of a project. So drawing becomes a conversation, the head through the hand onto the page. In his book, The Craftsman, Richard Sennett discusses the link between the head and the hand. For craftspeople, including writers and designers, planning and drafting are vital stages of the creative process. In thinking through the hand, ideas are fleshed out in action through the process of making and reflecting on making. So here's an example of my commercial practice. Down the bottom are 4 covers that I designed for a publisher called Seizure, and up the top are some sketches that I did in the initial stages of my planning. The top left is me starting to read through the manuscripts and pull up key ideas and things that I'm starting to put on paper. And on the right of that is a series of rectangles with circles in them. Because I know my own process well enough, I recall that that's me looking at a series of book covers by John Gall for Murakami's novels, Wind Up Bird Chronicle, etc. I used drawing as a way to actually note the ideas that I took from looking at other people's work, rather than leaving an image of John Gall's excellent series of book covers there for me to keep looking at and feel intimidated by, or accidentally processing so much that I start to copy his work rather than copy the idea of patterns and patterning that I was first interested in. The sketching is a way to make me actually just note what it is that I'm thinking of, as opposed to keeping full images like Pinterest boards of other people's work, which can actually be really overwhelming. The sketches on the right that are sticky taped in from a ripped bit of paper, you can actually see where the final kind of layout or composition of some of those designs was happening. I always sketch on paper before I go to the computer. I also sketch notes in lectures. So top left is a diagram that was shown in a lecture that I attended. It's about the economic distribution of wealth in 1804. But at the time, I was thinking a lot about climate change and climate change visualizations. And if you see underneath it, there's my notebook in which I wrote, aesthetically like icebergs. What that actually did, this little glimmer of an idea snowballed into a project that I'm still working on 2 years later, where I'm designing these sort of confusing diagrams that look like they might be about climate change, when in fact they're about fiction and climate fiction. It's a complicated project and I'm not going to go into it now. But the point is, because I keep notes all the time, everywhere, I never know when an idea is going to take off. And when a small scribble, like aesthetically like icebergs, is going to launch me into a research project that will consume me for years. This is another kind of drawing, which is a diagram that I designed to help talk through the ideas behind my work. So on the left side of the diagram, these are all the things that I was reading and thinking about when I designed things on the right, the 2 blue diagrams. It's a kind of conversation piece that I can use to talk through what I'm doing, which brings me to the last type of drawing that I'm going to talk about here, which is drawing as a communication tool. And this is where drawing can be used as a tool for collaboration. Drawing is quick communication between you and someone you're trying to collaborate with or get feedback from. Architect Cedric Burgess says, you can get a lot of buy-in from clients on a project if you are able to express quickly and clearly what you want on a piece of paper. This sketch by Stephen Hole shows some quite detailed renderings as well as some very sketchy drawings, and this would be used to communicate with other people in a project team what he means. Likewise, this series of maps up the top, the 3 rectangles up there with sketches, these are things that I would sketch when I was doing my doctoral research, and I would take them in for meetings with my supervisors, so I had something to keep me on track. Some of them are sketches about things that I maybe wanted to design, but most of them are sketches about what I was trying to think through at the time. When I finished my doctoral thesis, I had 82 of these maps, and I had an emotional attachment to them. So I origamied them into birds and put them as a flock in my studio. I later suspended them as a mobile. 10 years later, I still have some of them in my office, because what they remind me of is the importance of sketching and drawing and writing out my ideas, not just for myself, but also to open conversations with people around me. Thank you for your time listening to this.